Humans of Earth, the alien began, his lips curling into a sneer. I am Lord Gondor of the Eternal Dominion. We have watched your feeble kind stumble through the cosmos, clinging to primitive technology and misplaced arrogance. It is time you understand your place. Gandora's words oozed contempt as he leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. You will surrender, or you will be conquered. To my soldiers, this will not be a war, but an exercise, a simple task to subjugate a weak, cowardly species. Prepare yourselves for annihilation. The broadcast cut out, leaving Earth in stunned silence. The realization that humanity was no longer alone and no longer safe sank in like a dagger. On a remote military base hidden deep beneath the Nevada desert, a group of men gathered around a large holographic table. The room hummed with tension. These were not ordinary men. They were Navy SEAL Team Omega, humanity's last best hope. Commander Logan Bale stood at the head of the group, his expression carved from stone. A man in his late 30s, Bale exuded calm authority. His sharp blue eyes missed nothing, and a faint scar running down his jawline hinted at years of brutal combat. Bale had led teams into impossible situations before, but this felt different. The stakes weren't a nation or even a continent. It was the entire planet. This isn't just about us, Bale said, his voice low and steady, slicing through the tension. They think we're easy prey. They think we'll roll over and die. They're wrong. Beside him, Jack Hawk Mercer leaned against the table, arms crossed. Hawk was the team sniper, a man of few words whose precision in the field was legendary. His piercing gaze was fixed on the holographic projection of the enemy flagship, a hulking monstrosity of metal and energy weapons. Cowards, huh? Hawk muttered, his voice dripping with quiet defiance. Let's see how brave they are when we're in their shadows. Kyle Gearhead, Rayner smirked from the far side of the table, tapping rapidly on a tablet. The team's tech specialist, Gearhead had a wiry frame and the restless energy of a man always thinking 3 steps ahead. He zoomed in on the enemy ship's schematics, recovered from intercepted transmissions. This is their flagship, Gearhead said, pointing to the core of the projection. The Obliterator. It's powered by a fusion reactor buried here. We overload that, and the whole thing goes boom. Ryan Boomer Garfield let out a low whistle, cracking his knuckles. The team's demolition expert was a stark contrast to Gearhead, broad-shouldered, loud, and utterly unshakable. Just tell me where to plant the fireworks, Boomer said with a grin. I'll give them a light show they'll never forget. The door to the briefing room hissed open, and General Marcus Fields entered, his presence commanding instant attention. A career soldier with graying hair and a voice like gravel, Fields carried the weight of the mission on his shoulders. He stepped up to the table, nodding at Bale. Team Omega, you've been handpicked for this mission because there's no one else who can pull it off, Fields began, his tone grave. We're outgunned, outnumbered, and completely underestimated. But that's our edge. They think we're weak. You're going to show them what human resolve looks like. Bale nodded sharply. What's the objective, sir? Fields pointed to the Obliterator schematic. You'll infiltrate their flagship, sabotage their power core, and disable their fleet's command capabilities. This is surgical, quick, and clean. No room for error. Gearhead raised an eyebrow. And how exactly are we supposed to get past their defenses? That thing's bristling with more firepower than anything we've ever seen. Fields allowed himself a small, grim smile. We've been working on something. Stealth tech adapted from alien wreckage we recovered years ago. It'll get you in close, but once you're aboard, you're on your own. The team exchanged glances. This wasn't the first time they'd face impossible odds, but the scale of this mission was unprecedented. Still, none of them voiced doubt. They didn't have to. Let's gear up, Bale said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. We've got a galaxy to prove wrong. The meeting dissolved into action. In the armory, the team suited up in advanced combat gear, armor designed for mobility and resilience, outfitted with cutting-edge tech. Gearhead handed out custom-modified weapons, each tailored to its user. Hawk inspected his rifle, running his fingers over the sleek barrel. "How do you improve on perfection?" he asked, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "You'll find a way to complain," Gearhead shot back, grinning. Boomer strapped on a satchel packed with explosives, his movements practiced and precise. "Think they'll notice when half their ship's missing," he joked, earning a chuckle from Hawk. In the midst of the banter, Bale stood apart, double-checking his equipment with methodical precision. He didn't speak, but his presence anchored the team. They knew that when the time came, Bale would lead them through hell and back. As they boarded the stealth craft, the weight of the mission settled over them. The cabin was quiet, save for the hum of the engines and the occasional clink of gear. Bale broke the silence as the craft lifted off, his voice calm but resolute. "They called us cowards," he said, his words hanging in the air. "Let's make sure they never forget what humans are capable of." The stealth craft disappeared into the void, heading straight for the obliterator. Above Earth, the stars shone cold and indifferent, unaware of the battle about to unfold. The SEAL team pressed forward, ready to show the galaxy that humanity was far from finished. The hangar buzzed with muted energy as SEAL Team Omega worked in focused silence. The team moved like clockwork, each man lost in his role. The stealth craft loomed behind them, sleek and nearly invisible to the naked eye, its hull shimmering faintly under the harsh fluorescent lights. This mission demanded more than skill, it required perfection. Commander Logan Bale stood at the center of the hangar, arms crossed, his piercing gaze tracking every detail. He didn't need to issue commands. His men knew what was expected. Still, Bale's presence was a silent anchor, a reminder that failure was not an option. Earth's survival depended on them. Kyle Gearhead, Rayner knelt beside a crate of equipment, carefully inspecting a small, palm-sized device that pulsed faintly with green light. "EMP nodes are good to go," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. His fingers moved with practiced precision as he placed the nodes into a reinforced case. "These babies will short out their internal comms and sensors. They won't see us coming." Ryan Boomer Garfield leaned against the crate, arms crossed, watching Gearhead with a smirk. "Just don't fry our gear while you're at it," he teased. Boomer's voice was loud enough to carry, but his posture betrayed his readiness. He held a detonator in one hand, flipping it idly between his fingers. "Relax, Boomer. If I wanted to fry you, I'd have done it ages ago." Gearhead shot back without missing a beat. From across the room, Jack Hawk Mercer sat perched on a crate, methodically cleaning his rifle. The long, black weapon gleamed under the lights, its edges sharp and deadly. Hawk's face was calm, unreadable, but there was a quiet intensity in the way he handled the weapon. "You all talk too much," Hawk murmured, his voice low. "Save the jokes for when we're back home." Boomer snorted. "You're assuming we'll be back in one piece, Hawk. Optimistic for you." "Quiet," Bale said sharply, his voice cutting through the banter. The team immediately fell silent, their focus snapping back to the task at hand. Bale stepped forward, his expression hard. "This isn't a training op. This is as real as it gets," he began, his tone even but firm. "The enemy thinks they've got the upper hand. They're wrong. We hit fast, we hit hard, and we don't leave until we've done what we came to do." "Understood." The team nodded in unison, their joking demeanor replaced by steely resolve. Bale turned to the holographic display beside him, which showed a rotating image of the obliterator. "The plan is simple," Bale continued, pointing to a section of the ship near its lower hull. "We breach here at a maintenance port. Gearhead will disable their external sensors long enough for us to slip inside. Once we're in, we move as one. No noise, no mistakes. Our primary objective is the fusion core." "Boomer, that's your show." Boomer grinned, patting the satchel at his side. "Can't wait." Bale's gaze shifted to Hawk. "You'll cover us from the rear. If we're spotted, you take the shot. No hesitation." Hawk nodded, a faint flicker of a smirk tugging at his lips. "Won't need a second chance." Finally, Bale turned to Gearhead. "You're our lifeline. keep their systems blind, and give us the edge we need to get out alive. Always do, Gearhead replied, his tone light but his expression serious. The sound of boots against metal echoed through the hangar as General Fields approached, his presence immediately drawing the team's attention. He surveyed them for a moment before speaking. "This is it, gentlemen," Fields said. "You're not just fighting for Earth. You're showing the galaxy who we are. Make them remember it." Bale met the general's gaze, a silent exchange of understanding passing between them. Then, with a sharp nod, Bale turned back to his team. "Load up." The men moved swiftly, their movements fluid and purposeful. They boarded the stealth craft, strapping into their seats as the hum of the engines began to fill the air. The cabin was dimly lit, the only sound the quiet clicks of weapons being checked and rechecked. As the craft lifted off, the reality of the mission settled over them. The Earth shrank in the viewport, its blue surface a stark contrast to the cold expanse of space. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, breaking the silence, Boomer leaned back in his seat, his voice cutting through the tension. "So, what do you think these aliens are like up close?" he asked, his tone casual. "Think they bleed the same as we do?" Hawk didn't look up from his rifle. "Doesn't matter. They'll still fall." "Focus," Bale said, his voice a low growl. "We'll have plenty of time for questions once the job's done." The stealth craft entered its cloaking mode, vanishing from sight as it approached the obliterator. The ship loomed ahead, a massive construct of dark metal and glowing energy conduits. It bristled with weapons and defensive turrets, but the stealth technology held. Approaching insertion point, Gearhead announced from the cockpit, his fingers flying over the controls. "Sensors are scrambled. We've got a window, but it won't last long." "Understood," Bale replied. He unstrapped himself, rising from his seat and motioning for the others to follow. The team moved quickly, each man checking his gear one final time. The craft docked silently against the ship's hull, a faint hiss signaling the seal. Gearhead worked quickly to override the maintenance port security, his hands steady despite the pressure. "Got it," he said after a moment, stepping back as the hatch slid open. Bale led the way, his weapon at the ready. The interior of the ship was dimly lit, the corridors lined with alien machinery and pulsing with an eerie, greenish light. The air was thick with the hum of energy and the faint, acrid scent of burning metal. "Stay sharp," Bale whispered, his voice barely audible over the ambient noise. The team moved as one, their steps silent, their formation tight. Hawk took the rear, his rifle sweeping the corridor behind them. Gearhead paused at intervals to disable security nodes, his focus unshakable. Boomer's fingers twitched against the trigger of his grenade launcher, ready for anything. As they reached a junction, Bale raised a fist, signaling a halt. He peered around the corner, his sharp eyes scanning for movement. A pair of alien guards stood ahead, their elongated forms clad in metallic armor. They spoke in guttural tones, their voices distorted by helmets. Bale turned back to his team, gesturing silently. Hawk nodded, stepping forward and raising his rifle. A single, suppressed shot echoed faintly, and one guard crumpled. The other turned, but before it could react, a second shot dropped it. Bale motioned for the team to move, his expression unreadable. They pressed deeper into the ship, the weight of the mission bearing down on them. Each step brought them closer to the fusion core and the heart of the enemy's power. As they reached a large, sealed door, Gearhead crouched beside the control panel, his tools already at work. "This is it," he muttered. "Give me 30 seconds. Bale glanced back at his team, his voice low but firm. "Get ready. This is where it gets real." Behind him, Boomer grinned, his hand resting on the detonator at his hip. Hawk tightened his grip on his rifle, his eyes sharp and focused. Gearhead's fingers flew over the panel, the tension thick as the door began to slide open. And then, as the shadows beyond the door loomed, Bale took a step forward, his weapon raised. The mission had begun. The door slid open with a low hiss, revealing a cavernous chamber bathed in pulsing green light. The walls were lined with alien machinery, their surfaces etched with glowing glyphs that hummed with barely restrained energy. At the center of the room loomed the fusion core, a massive, pulsating sphere suspended in a lattice of metal and conduits. The air thrummed with power, vibrating in their chests as the team moved inside. Commander Bale motioned for silence, his hand a sharp gesture in the faint glow. They spread out, each man moving with practiced precision. Hawk took up a position near the entrance, his rifle trained on the corridor they had come from. Boomer followed Bale toward the core, his satchel of explosives clinking faintly as he walked. Gearhead hung back, his eyes scanning the alien consoles lining the walls, fingers twitching over his tools. "Gearhead," Bale whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the machinery. "On it," Gearhead replied, sliding into position near a console. He began working quickly, his hands a blur as he bypassed the alien encryption. Boomer crouched beside the core, inspecting the massive structure with a critical eye. "This thing's putting out more energy than anything I've ever seen," he murmured. "I'll need a few extra charges to make sure it goes down." "Do what you have to," Bale replied, his eyes sweeping the room. "But make it fast." A sudden clatter echoed from the corridor behind them. Hawk stiffened, his rifle snapping up to aim at the source. "We've got company," he murmured, his voice calm despite the tension. Bale turned sharply. "Hold them off." "Gearhead, how long?" "2 minutes," Gearhead replied, not looking up. "Maybe less." "We don't have 2 minutes," Bale growled. Hawk's rifle cracked once, the suppressed shot barely audible. An alien soldier crumpled in the doorway, its elongated body folding unnaturally as it hit the ground. A second soldier appeared, then a third, their weapons raised. Hawk fired again, each shot precise, each target falling before they could fire. The sound of heavy boots against metal grew louder, a steady rhythm that sent a chill through the team. "More incoming," Hawk reported, his tone grim. Bale cursed under his breath. "Boomer, lay a trap. We need to buy Gearhead time." Boomer grinned, pulling a grenade from his belt. "Now you're speaking my language." He moved quickly, planting a series of charges near the entrance. "Set," Boomer said, retreating to cover. The next wave of alien soldiers appeared, their weapons blazing. Energy bolts streaked through the air, searing against the walls and scattering sparks. Boomer detonated the charges, the explosion ripping through the corridor and sending a shockwave that echoed through the room. The alien soldiers were thrown back, their bodies crumpling like rag dolls. "Nice," Boomer said, flashing a grin. "Don't get cocky," Bale warned, his eyes on the corridor. "Hawk, keep them pinned." "Gearhead," status. "Almost there," Gearhead replied, sweat beading on his brow. The console emitted a faint beep, and the glyphs shifted from green to red. "Got it. Their internal sensors are blind." "Good," Bale said. "Boomer, get those charges set." Boomer moved to the core, his hands steady as he placed the explosives. Each charge clicked into place with a faint whine, the indicators glowing faintly. 5 charges all primed, Boomer said. "This thing's going down hard." "Good work," Bale replied. "Now let's move before." An ear-splitting roar cut him off as a massive alien figure stepped into the chamber. Clad in heavy armor, the alien towered over the soldiers they had encountered before. Its glowing eyes fixed on the team, and a deep, guttural voice echoed through the room. "Intruders," it rumbled, raising a massive weapon that crackled with energy. "You dare defile the Dominion's heart." Bale raised his weapon, firing a burst of rounds that pinged harmlessly off the alien's armor. "Focus fire," he shouted. Hawk shifted his aim, sending a series of precise shots at the alien's exposed joints. The creature staggered but didn't fall, roaring in defiance as it unleashed a barrage of energy blasts. The team scattered, taking cover behind the consoles. Boomer pulled a grenade from his belt, lobbing it at the alien. The explosion engulfed the creature in smoke and fire, but as the debris cleared, it emerged, battered but still standing. "This one's tough," Boomer muttered. "Gearhead, find us an exit," Bale ordered, his voice sharp. "I'm working on it," Gearhead shouted back, his hands flying over the controls. The alien charged, its massive weapon smashing through a console and sending sparks flying. Bale rolled to the side, firing a burst at its exposed back. The round struck true, eliciting a pained roar, but the creature turned, swinging its weapon in a wide arc. Bale barely ducked in time, the air singing with the force of the swing. Hawk moved into position, lining up a shot on the alien's head. His rifle cracked, and the alien's roar turned into a gargled snarl as the round pierced its neck. It fell to one knee, its weapon clattering to the floor. "Boomer, finish it," Bale shouted. Boomer didn't hesitate, pulling a charge from his belt and slamming it onto the alien's chest. He dove for cover as the charge detonated, the blast tearing through the creature and sending shrapnel flying. When the smoke cleared, the alien was motionless, its massive form crumpled on the floor. "Target down," Bale said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Exits open," Gearhead called, pointing to a hatch on the far wall. "Move," Bale ordered, waving the team toward the hatch. They moved quickly, slipping through the hatch and into the narrow corridor beyond. Boomer triggered the charges remotely as they ran, the detonation sending a massive shockwave through the ship. The fusion core erupted in a blinding flash of light, and the ship shuddered violently as secondary explosions rippled outward. As they reached the extraction point, the stealth craft appeared, its hatch opening to receive them. The team piled inside, collapsing into their seats as the craft sped away. Behind them, the obliterator burned, its once mighty form reduced to a smoldering wreck. For a moment, no one spoke, the weight of the mission settling over them. Then Boomer broke the silence, his voice carrying a faint edge of relief. "Cowards, huh?" he said, grinning. "Guess they learned the hard way." Hawk smirked, leaning back in his seat. "Let's see how brave they are without their flagship." Bale didn't smile, his expression still focused. He glanced at the viewport, watching the burning remains of the alien ship fade into the void. "This was just the beginning," he said quietly. "They'll be back, and so will we." The craft disappeared into the darkness, carrying the team home as the galaxy reeled from the reminder of what humanity could do. The stealth craft descended silently onto the landing pad, its cloaking mechanisms disengaging with a faint shimmer. As the hatch opened, the team disembarked, their boots striking the metal floor of the hangar with heavy finality. Around them, technicians and soldiers moved with quiet efficiency, but their eyes occasionally flicked toward the seals with a mix of awe and respect. The men who had just returned were not ordinary soldiers. They were Earth's first line of defense, and they had struck a devastating blow against the Galactic Empire. Commander Bale was the last to step off the craft. His gaze swept over the team, taking in the weary but determined expressions on their faces. Gearhead's uniform was smeared with soot, his hands still twitching slightly from the adrenaline. Boomer's ever-present grin had softened, but the glint in his eyes spoke of a job well done. Hawk looked as calm and collected as always, though his knuckles were white around the rifle slung over his shoulder. Bale nodded to himself. They had done the impossible, and they had done it together. General Field strode forward to meet them, his face a mixture of relief and grim determination. "Commander Bale," he began, his voice carrying over the noise of the hangar. "The Empire's flagship is gone, and their fleet is in disarray. Your team's success has bought us time. Time we desperately needed." Bale's expression remained neutral. "Time's good, General, but it won't win the war. They'll regroup, and when they come back, they'll come back harder." Fields nodded, his jaw tightening. "Understood. But for now, we've sent them a message. Earth isn't a target. It's a fight." The words hung in the air, a declaration of defiance that resonated with everyone present. Bale glanced at his team, then back at Fields. We'll debrief in an hour. Right now, my men need rest. Fields inclined his head. Of course. Dismissed. The team filed out of the hangar, their movement slower now, heavy with exhaustion. As they made their way to the barracks, silence stretched between them. It wasn't the strained silence of unease, but the kind that comes from shared experience, from understanding what words couldn't express. In the barracks, Boomer collapsed onto a bunk with a groan. "Man, I've never been so happy to see a bed in my life," he muttered, kicking off his boots. Gearhead sat on the edge of his bunk, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing patterns on the metal frame. That tech, it was like nothing I've ever seen before. If we had more time, I could have learned so much. Hawk leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. "We didn't have time," he said simply. "And we won't get any more if they come back stronger." Bale stood in the doorway, his arms folded. "Hawk's right," he said, his voice cutting through the room. "What we did today was a victory, but it wasn't the end. The Empire's going to see this as an insult, and they'll want revenge. We need to be ready." Boomer propped himself up on one elbow, his grin faint but still present. "Ready for what? Exactly? Another suicide mission?" Bale met his gaze, his expression unwavering. "Ready for whatever it takes to keep Earth safe. That's why we're here." The room fell silent again, the weight of Bale's words settling over them. Each man processed the mission in his own way. The close calls, the lives taken, the knowledge that their actions had shifted the course of the war. After a moment, Gearhead spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "Do you think they'll back off? After what we did?" Bale shook his head. "No. They'll regroup, they'll adapt, and they'll come back harder. But that's the point. We've shown them we're not just prey. We're a threat, and threats can't be ignored." Hawk nodded slightly, his gaze distant. "They underestimated us. That's their mistake. Next time they won't." Boomer stretched out on his bunk, his arms behind his head. "Good. Makes it more fun when we prove them wrong again." A faint chuckle rippled through the room, easing some of the tension. Even Bale allowed himself a small, fleeting smile. As the team settled in, the base intercom crackled to life, summoning Bale to the command center. He left without a word, his boots echoing down the empty corridor. The command center was a hive of activity, with officers and analysts poring over data feeds and tactical maps. Bale found General Fields standing near the central display, his face illuminated by the holographic projection of the destroyed flagship. "The Obliterated's remains are being scanned as we speak," Fields said without preamble. "Preliminary analysis suggests their power systems were more advanced than we anticipated. We'll need to study this data carefully." Bale nodded. "Good. We'll need every edge we can get." Fields turned to face him, his expression somber. "The Council wants to declassify the mission details. They think the public needs to know what you did out there." Bale's jaw tightened. "The public needs to know we're fighting for them. They don't need to know how close we came to failing." Fields sighed. "I'll push back on the Council, but the pressure's mounting. The Empire's declaration of war wasn't subtle. People are scared. Then let them be scared," Bale said. "Fear makes people fight harder. But don't give them false hope. We won a battle, not the war." Fields studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I'll handle the politics. You focus on your team." Bale left the command center, feeling the weight of the war more acutely than ever. He made his way to the observation deck, with a vast expanse of space stretched out before him. The stars glittered coldly, indifferent to the conflict brewing among them. He thought of the enemy they had faced, the alien soldiers, the towering juggernaut, the power radiating from the fusion core. The Empire was vast, their technology leagues ahead of humanity's. But they weren't invincible. Today had proved that. The sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see Hawk approaching, his rifle slung over one shoulder. "Couldn't sleep?" Bale asked. Hawk shook his head. "Too much on my mind." He joined Bale at the railing, his gaze fixed on the stars. "They'll come back," Hawk said after a moment. Bale nodded. "They will." Hawk's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. "Good. Gives us another chance to remind them who they're dealing with." Bale allowed himself a rare smile in return. "That's the spirit." The two men stood in silence, the weight of the galaxy pressing down on them. But beneath it all was a spark of determination, a defiance that no enemy could extinguish. Earth had been underestimated, dismissed as weak and cowardly. The Galactic Empire had learned otherwise, and it was a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. As the observation deck dimmed for the night cycle, Bale turned and headed for the barracks. There was still work to be done, and humanity's best were ready to do it.